He had not been aware of that. He literally had not been aware of what had transpired.
What happened was, to use an English phrase, what we did was clumsy. It was not done with a lot of grace. I was under the impression certain things had happened that hadn't happened.
Now what's important is precisely to be sure that such a situation will not be possible for our future.
Well, it was a major diplomatic blunder. The U.S. not telling France of an end to a submarine deal, a big one, dealing instead with Australia, and the French were really upset about it. So much so they pulled the ambassador from the U.S., the French ambassador to the U.S. out. Now, the president said it was a clumsy mistake. Didn't apologize, but that's the first part of his Europe trip. We'll start there with our panel. Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist, Harold Ford Jr., former Tennessee congressman, CEO of Empowerment and Inclusion Capital, and Trey Gowdy, former congressman from South Carolina. Trey, clumsy, and he didn't even know about it, is what he told the French President Macron.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would have admitted that, even if it were true. I can tell you, imagine how bad your life is when you are happier meeting with the president of France, who you stiffed in a submarine deal. You'd rather do that than go meet with the Progressive Caucus in the House. How bad is your life if you prefer that?
Yeah, so let's turn there, Harold. I mean, we saw what happened last night up on Capitol Hill, the punt to next week. There's still some thought that it might be 2 weeks. Some people are saying sometime before Thanksgiving, where this all gets ironed out. I mean, it's pretty ugly. It may still happen, but it's pretty ugly.
Thanks for having me on, and I would agree with you. It's not the way I'm sure he orchestrated it or choreographed it, but sometimes big-time legislation is not choreographed or is not choreographable in the way you may like. At the end of the day, if they get this passed, $1.75 trillion, you have a $1.25 trillion package for infrastructure. That's $3 trillion he would have gotten in the first year in the presidency. Again, to your point, it has not been pretty. But I give credit to some of a lot of the progressives, because they kept their word. And I think now the question is whether or not Senators Manchin and Sinema can keep their word as well. And if they do, we will pass an historic piece of legislation. Again, not pretty the way they did it, but we often don't see this kind of sausage making. We just happen to be seeing it in this instance.
Talk about not pretty, Ben. This story that was from the Wall Street Journal and now is moving forward about the possible plans to pay illegal immigrants who've been separated in their families some $450,000 or more. Representative Dan Crenshaw tweeting out, Biden wants to pay illegal immigrants $450,000 for their hardship while breaking our laws. For perspective, if a service member is killed in action, their next of kin gets an insurance payment of $400,000. Let that sink in. I'm not sure I believed this story when I first read it, Ben, but there hasn't been pushback yet, and we haven't got an official shoot down of this story.
You know, Brett, as the publisher of The Federalist, people pitch me occasionally stories, and when this one came into my email, I reacted by assuming that it was not true. I could not believe that something like this was actually happening, and yet we are seeing that there is not pushback to this, that this is something that is ongoing. And the amount of backlash that I think you're going to see to this is just going to be unprecedented. People are not going to accept this and just go along with it. And just to circle back to Harold's point, I don't think that this dog's breakfast of a bill or a Fire Festival dinner, if you want the more current recollection, is going to be something that you can actually sell to the American people. The Biden administration seems to be going down this road of meandering through all of these different topics that are of the utmost importance to the American people, and then just sort of saying, trust us, what we're doing is going to be something that you like, when they have no major thing to point to that's actually going to make a difference. And certainly the fact that they couldn't get this done in time for the Virginia election is something that weighs on the minds of a lot of DC Democrats tonight.
Well, particularly Terry McAuliffe in the Virginia election. And speaking of which, final days before Tuesday's election day, we saw the poll that we had last night, big shift in that race. Now you've got a lot of different things happening. The Youngkin communications director saying that Terry McAuliffe's campaign has been the dirtiest, nastiest, most dishonest campaign in Virginia history. This morning, they're closing out his career by going even lower. There was this moment this morning where there were these guys with tiki torches, Trey, in front of a Youngkin bus saying we're all in for Glenn, suggesting, hearkening back to Charlottesville and the Nazis and the white supremacists who march in that march. Late today, there was a lot of allegations that they were Democrats, actually. The Lincoln Project said that they were taking credit or saying that they were behind it. The Youngkin people are saying they think they're Democrats. Bottom line, you've got a lot of stuff going on. Then you look at this. This is a flyer that came out in which you would think that it's Youngkin just being endorsed by Donald Trump, and that's a Republican thing, and Trump next to Youngkin and thumbs up. But if you look closely on the back of this flyer, it's the Democratic Party of Virginia, and specifically the McAuliffe campaign that really wants that tie between Donald Trump and Glenn Youngkin.
Yeah, I mean, Brett, if people say that it was Democrats and the Lincoln Project, they're both right. I mean, the Lincoln Project is a bunch of Democrats. So this is why people hate politics. I mean, there may be reasons to not vote for Glenn Youngkin, but he's not a white supremacist. So the fact that Democrats are on the verge of losing in Virginia for what, the first time in 20 years? When you run a candidate who's been around since the Hamilton-Burr duel, and he's a Clinton acolyte that no one's excited about, Virginia Democrats found a way to make that state competitive.
I'll give you the last word, Harold. We're going to do without winners and losers, but you got the last word here.
If Glenn Youngkin, who's I think run a great campaign so far, who reminds me a little bit of Trey Gowdy and some of the Republicans that I served with, whom I respected so greatly. If he decides to bring in a guy, which I think he's going to bring in Donald Trump in the last few days, who lost that state by 10 points, maybe he doesn't have it locked up yet. This campaign has not been the prettiest campaign, but we'll have an outcome Tuesday, and I agree. It will pretend what will happen in next year's midterms, but I wouldn't count Terry McAuliffe out. And I certainly, for Glenn Youngkin to bring Donald Trump in, it leads me to believe he doesn't have this locked up yet.
All right, Ben, I owe you next time. Thank you, panel. Have a great weekend.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.